Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's webinar, What Turns You On? I'm Dr. Alexandra Katehakis, and today is Monday, October 7th. Our topic today is, have pornography and relationships influenced your sexuality? And maybe if I were to retitle that, I would say, in what ways have pornography and relationships influenced your sexuality? Because pretty much everybody has looked at pornography and pretty much everybody's had a relationship. So let's keep that in mind as we go along here. And as usual, a few things before we start. I want to remind you to type your questions into the Q&A box. So not into the chat box, but yes, into the Q&A box, and I'll answer them as we go along. Also, be sure to leave us your book reviews or comments on Amazon for What Turns You On. Let us know what you love about the workbook, how you're using it, how you've shared it with other people, and things of that nature. It really helps readers who are looking for guides for sexuality. Also, a reminder that if I mention a book or a resource, you will find that in the chat box as well. Then if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel by clicking the subscribe button below, and that way you never miss a post. You can also keep up with what we're doing here by following me on Instagram at Alex Katehakis or at Center for Healthy Sex. So this webinar series, What Turns You On, will explore aspects of my workbook. And again, this workbook is called What Turns You On, A Guide to Living Your Best Sex Life. And it's designed to help you get honest with yourself about how you define sex so you can enjoy the kind of touch and sexual activities you really enjoy, and so that you can have explicit and meaningful conversations and exchanges with a sexual partner. And as we go along today, I want you to also to consider this question of what turns you on when it comes to everything in your life. What kind of food turns you on? What kind of people turns you on? What kind of movies turn you on? What activities? And when I say turn on, I'm talking about a vitality state, a feeling of being lit up or excited about something. So consider that this isn't just reduced to sex or sexual acts, but if you're turned on as a person, if you are vital, if you feel good or celebratory internally, then everything you do is going to be better, including your sex life. But the way you relate to friends, families, your environment, everything feels a little bit brighter and shinier because you are living your life in a way that puts you in vitality states, and you're staying out of negativity or toxic relationships or drama, or the kind of things that deplete you. So let's think about this as the kind of things that energize you when we talk about being turned on. So the first question here was, how have relationships impacted your sexuality? And just that word relationship can bring up different associations for different people because there's no ideal or standard one. And we certainly can transfer our ideas and expectations about what a relationship should be based on what we saw in our family of origin, based on the way our parents related or didn't relate, or based in ideas that we see from film and television. But past romances can influence our relationships, certainly cultural norms about what's prescribed, how we're supposed to be. And then we can also find out that once we meet somebody or start to fall in love with them, that our partner is completely different than those representations. And so take a minute to think about, how were relationships modeled for you or advertised for you? What did you think you were supposed to do when you were in elementary school, or later in middle school or high school? And were those ideas consistent, or did they start to get shattered along the way? Because what if your parents divorced, or what if they were arguing all the time, or what if you saw if you were female, a certain level of subjugation that you didn't like, but that's what you were supposed to do. Or male, you were modeled a certain level of domination that didn't really resonate for you, which can be true for a lot of men because they're seeing it culturally in their household, but with their peers at school or in the larger culture, they're seeing some different representation of what it means to be male and in a relationship. So instead of relying on these ideals or fantasies about relationships, we really want to learn from our past relationships about what love, romance, and sexuality mean to us and what they mean to us today. And this becomes part of, I think, of an aging path and a wisdom path where we really start to honor that we are who we are and that we are different from other people. So going outside and constantly checking and looking and comparing is really a fool's errand. You have to have the courage to turn inside and ask yourself these difficult questions about what's really true for me. What is attractive to me? What do I like? What do I want to keep from my family of origin or my cultural inheritance? And what doesn't fit because those are ancient practices, perhaps, and they might have been great 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, but they do not work in our culture today. So part of the idea of excavating this in this workbook is to really answer the question of who am I? What do I like? What is true for me? What do I want at this time in my life? And similarly, ask yourself, where do your ideas about a love relationship come from? There's so many different iterations of that now. There is what's prescribed, there's what's rebelled against, there's what we see in film and television, there's what we see in different cultures. So, where do your ideas about a love relationship come from? And have you forged and formed them yourself? Which I think is an adult developmental task, is that we take what we were given and we deconstruct it, and then we reconstruct it in a way where we maybe pull strands of what we learned growing up into our construction because it really fits us and it's right for us. And others we discard because it doesn't actually work for what my true nature is or your true nature. It's how we were told it was supposed to be. And how do you define your ideal relationship? Um, Many of us grew up with fairy tales, things as ancient as Cinderella with the prince and the princess. But is that how you define your ideal relationship? Do you think somebody's going to come rescue you or find you or get you? Probably not. And what are the roles in the relationship? Is it egalitarian? Is there a power differential? Do you want that? Do you like that? And what have you learned about your ideal relationship from previous relationships? What do you want to keep that was really good or beautiful or true? And what do you want to discard that was toxic, unhealthy, and maybe even abusive? And what have you learned about sex from previous relationships? Because our past sexual relationships can be some of our best teachers when it comes to sex and sexuality, because it's a place where we get to practice sex and sexuality. So, what have you learned about sex from previous relationships? And then ask yourself, what do you need to change about yourself in order to have a good relationship? So, what is your part in maybe why past relationships didn't work, or how controlling you were, or demanding you were, both in the relationship and sexually? And can you challenge yourself to really look closely at what you brought to that relationship and how you were a party to the co-construction of what the sex felt like, looked like, what the parameters were, how much you adventurous you were, and how much you playing it safe. So all of those questions are great material for journaling and writing about. So you start to get to the bottom of What's under the construction you were handed? What are the bits and pieces that have kind of Velcroed onto that you don't really want? They just sort of stuck on there. How do you pull it all apart and investigate it so that you can construct something that you feel really good about? Because if you feel good about what's true for you sexually, what you want, what you like, what you dislike, what you're interested in trying, only then can you communicate that to a partner. You can't otherwise, and you cannot expect somebody else to mind read what's good and right and true for you. My girlfriend and I have compatibility issues when it comes to sex. I'm a sex positive, heteroflexible older male, and she's more of a traditionalist, vanilla, heteronormative kind of gal. I have not been able to convince her to see a sex therapist with me to close this gap. We have a strong romantic connection, which is hard to find, but our sexual incompatibility is preventing this relationship from progressing to commitment. Any thoughts? Well, I always think it's curious when people say they have a great relationship or a strong romantic connection, um, and that everything else is great but our sex life. So that does not hang together for me. That's not congruent. So there's something missing that both of you are not talking about. And I think for you asking yourself the question, why would I choose somebody who was unavailable in this realm to me, who wasn't willing to explore kind of the depth and the beauty that eroticism holds and brings? That's a way to actually get more close or closer or spiritually closer also is right through the heart of the erotic. And why is she so closed down in this way? I make up that there's fear there, fear of who she would find out she is sexually. And that's often the case. Is like, what would it mean about me if I tried something that was out of my wheelhouse or something I have judgments about? What would it say about me? Oftentimes we have difficulty seeing ourselves in particular ways. So we shut things down because we don't want our partner seeing us that way either. So there's a lot to talk about in this gap. And unless both parties get really honest with each other, the romantic relationship or the friendship can only go so far. And I'm not saying that this is deliberate lying, but self-deception is very powerful. We don't really see what we don't want to see when we're deceiving ourselves, and then we deceive the other. And then there are these controlling dynamics also. Typically, when the low desire person controls the sex, then they're also controlling the relationship. So you might want to take a look at a book called Rekindling Desire, and look at these low desire, high desire positions and read that book out loud together and talk about it and see if that starts to take you in the direction of finding a sex therapist. I think you said something about that. We have strong. Yeah, I was going to say, and then therapy would be the next step also. All right, how do you suggest evaluating what is working or not? I often find self-judgments arise after a sexual experience based on a lot of shoulds. It seems the more exciting an experience is, the more I feel I shouldn't want or like this. Well, that sounds like shame to me. So I would suggest that you really look at your sexual shame and what the messages were that you got from childhood. The workbook will help you unearth a lot of that. And then it's very useful to take what you learn in the workbook and process it with a therapist. But you definitely have a lot of shame going on there. Well, would this book help me move past my sexual abuse in my bedroom caused by my husband's influence of porn in my bedroom? I've done lots of work on my trauma. My body hasn't allowed me to enjoy sexuality with him. We're almost 4 years in recovery together. Any suggestions? I would think that you would want to talk to your therapist about where you're at in terms of how porn infiltrated the bedroom, how it infiltrated your sex life, where your boundaries were violated, and all of those things. Because until you really heal what you feel was abusive, and really both where you were taken advantage of and where also you collapsed your boundaries and you didn't say no, and maybe you couldn't say no. But when you can start to look at that and shore yourself up with your own boundaries, then you can go back and look at your sexuality, and ask yourself, wow, is this something that I enjoy, or was it taken from me because it was forced on me? And now I don't want to have anything to do with any of it because I'm so disgusted and angry by it. But that is then, having lost part of your sexuality to someone or something else. So see if you can do more work in your therapy on that, and then take a look at the workbook, because the workbook really starts with the influences that I'm talking about now: friends, family, religion, culture, environment, college. Those are sort of the precursors. Those set the stage for our sexuality, and then it goes from there. Can you speak about the bravery required to experiment in sexual space to help one answer questions? Feeling safe is a concern and maybe part of my avoidance of meeting people with whom I can experiment with. Well, look, if you don't feel safe, you cannot be sexual. And if you don't feel safe, then you're violating yourself. No one else is violating you. So you have to choose a lover that you trust, that you know is not going to shame you or make fun of you, that's willing to try things and talk about it afterwards. And so that really requires conversations on the front end. And there's a courage that comes with talking to somebody that you want to be sexual with and say, hey, can we talk about sex first? Because this will tie into conversations about consent that I'm going to talk about down the road here with this workbook. But consent is extraordinarily important, in order to create the safety and the trust that you're talking about. And also recognizing that consent can change in the middle of a sex act. So having a safe partner is essential for this experimentation. And it doesn't even have to be somebody that you're in love with. It has to be somebody that you know, hopefully you like, hopefully you're somewhat attracted to, but that you really believe is going to protect your heart and your privacy, and that you have agreements about how you're going to negotiate sex and how you're going to talk about it afterwards, and that anybody has a right to say stop, or I don't want to do this anymore. Uh, Someone writes, what are your thoughts about fantasy while intimate with my wife? How can you suggest increasing the pleasure as a couple? Well, I think if you're in fantasy, you're not really present with your wife. And so I think it's useful for couples to talk to each other about their fantasy while they're having sex. And that way you're building the fantasy together. You're both included in on it. You're making eye contact with each other. You're in the sex act together, as opposed to you're fantasizing about somebody else and she's fantasizing about somebody else, and you're just putting your bodies together. Now, if your fantasy is that you're both fantasizing about somebody else while having sex and you've talked about that, then knock yourself out. But the idea is to be relational, not to be isolated during your sex, or somewhat dissociative if you're both drifting off into fantasy. And typically, your partner knows when you're not present. They know when you're elsewhere. They can feel it. They feel kind of emotionally abandoned at some point. So you should talk to your wife about that. My wife and I have been married for more than 40 years. Congratulations. And almost every issue, we get along great and we're each other's best friends. I have a kink that she doesn't share and it's somewhat repelled by. She refuses to indulge in it. For most of our marriage, our sex life has been fine. I've been able to ignore the kink and make vanilla love, but I'm in my 60s now. My sexuality has diminished and it's only my kink that turns me on. Our love life has dried up and my only sexual outlet is porn that features my kink. Do you have any advice for me? Well, I would think that's a sex therapy issue, that the two of you really need to talk about this and look at why this has become so divided and polarized now, and why she can't meet you and you can. I mean, you have met her in this vanilla sex for a long time. What happens to her that she can't meet you partially? What goes on internally? Why does she refuse it? What does that say about her? And what other options do you have as a couple in order for you to experience this arousal. So these are big, big conversations about where do we go from here after 40 years and what kind of sex life do we want to have? And right now, it sounds like it's a solo sex life and that you are missing that connection with her. So that would be a good place to start, is to let her know that. And see what ideas she might have for increasing arousal between the two of you. All right, thank you for those questions. So then let's look at the impact of pornography, because some of you mentioned that as well. So for some people, pornography can be a form of sexual variety, or like this gentleman was saying, it's where he finds his kink. It finds the thing that's most arousing to him. And others can experience it as traumatizing, as the woman previously mentioned, when porn was being hoisted upon her during sex. Or it can be traumatizing because people first saw it at a very young age, 5 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old. And that was sort of indelibly stamped on their erotic template. And so it makes it very difficult for them to, um, feel like sex is their own because they've got all this pornography in their head. When porn is complementary to your sex life, and ways that you find fulfilling, then you know that it's right for you. So if you do it on occasion, if you and your partner like a particular type of porn, if it isn't the main event, like you can only have sex when you watch pornography, because you're so disconnected from each other, or you're just using it to get off with each other. I mean, if that's your choice, that's your choice. But if it's complementary to your sex life, that you find fulfilling, satisfying, gratifying, then that's probably a healthy use of pornography. And watching porn can also be a way to get information about different positions, and possibilities that you might want to try with a partner. You may also discover that you're not alone and you're a full range of desires. Because when you see, like, wow, there's a lot of porn out there, or I didn't know that many people were into having sex on the couch. There's all this pornography about sex on the couch. I don't feel as odd or kinky or weird. That feels a lot more normal to me. So it can be normalizing. It can help you feel less alienated. It can make you feel like you've learned something new about sex that you're really enjoying. So those are many of the positive aspects about pornography. But if you find yourself watching it compulsively, or you're feeling demoralized afterwards, or you're alienating your partner, or it's isolating to you because you're avoiding the present, or you're avoiding having a relationship with a real person, or you're avoiding your partner in real time, then you want to be very careful, because it can become problematic quickly because you become reliant upon it. You like the feeling. It's the only way that you're having any kind of sex, and it can leave you feeling kind of lonely and alone. And regardless of the circumstances under which you're watching pornography, be careful not to compare yourself and your partner to the images that you see in porn. Remember that porn, like any other Hollywood movie, is make-believe. The lights are set up in a particular way, the positions are set in a particular way. Many male actors are using erectile enhancers. There have been all sorts of augmentations with breasts or penises. There are a lot of props. There's just a lot going on that is not the same as average people having pornography, which is why amateur porn, I think, became so popular with many people, because they couldn't relate to the Hollywood style porn. But in any case, be careful not to compare your performance, your body parts, your looks, everything to the people in pornography. And if you're watching pornography, make sure it's additive to your experiences, I said, in your psyche, that it's not degrading or debilitating to you or your sexuality, to yourself or to your partner. So just be mindful about it. It's sort of like drinking alcohol. I mean, do you drink a glass of wine or two at dinner because it enhances the taste of the food? Or are you getting so drunk that, you feel sick to your stomach and you don't even want to eat food? How are you using the alcohol? How are you using cannabis if you're in a state where it's legal? Do you do it occasionally for fun because you want to laugh with friends? Or are you doing it every single night and you're feeling more depressed and more isolated? So it's not the thing itself that is problematic. Um, Pornography can be perfectly healthy for many individuals, but it's not healthy if you're using it in a way where it's becoming debilitating. Someone says, what about the overwhelming data that suggests that porn isn't healthy for an individual or relationships? Well, I don't know about that data. There's certainly overwhelming data about sexual compulsivity and the amount of pornography, internet pornography somebody watches and the effect that has on the brain and the reward system. I'm talking about, you're saying that, or it looks like you're saying that any pornography is not healthy. I think that's more of a moral judgment than a scientific fact. That's like saying absolutely no mind-altering substance is healthy at all, which may or may not be true, but anything in moderation, anything that is enhancing to or additive to, and a person considers that healthy, then it's up to each individual to do what's true for them. I mean, I could say to you that, wearing cosmetics is unhealthy, that there are toxic chemicals in the lipstick and foundation that I have on now. That may very well be true, but I choose to wear cosmetics. So there are some people who don't. There are many women who don't wear makeup, that don't dye their hair because they don't want those toxins on their body, and that's their right. So I just want to be careful about passing any kind of moral judgment here. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about discernment and what feels additive versus subtractive to your personal well-being and to the well-being of your partner. Internet pornography is obviously more popular than ever now because it's just been around for decades. And as I said before, in many ways, it's opened us up to a myriad of possibilities for experimentation and experiencing sexual pleasure and get to know ourselves. And in other ways, it's shut us down. It's made us more self-conscious and full of comparison to our bodies, and activities that we fear we can never achieve. So there are endless arguments about whether porn is good or bad, but ultimately you have to be the judge of whether there's a place for porn in your sex life or not, or in your life or not. Like I said, you're the judge of whether you wear makeup, don't wear makeup, eat carbs, don't eat carbs, um, all of it. Wear sunglasses, don't wear sunglasses, wear sunblock, don't wear sunblock. There are a million choices that we have about what is good for us and what's not good for us. But we have to decide in an informed way. And we have to ask ourselves, do I feel good after this experience? Was it additive? Was it fun? Or am I feeling like I'm dependent on it now? Or is it leaving me despondent or depressed afterwards because I'm doing too much of it? So here are some other questions to ask yourself. How old were you when you first viewed pornography, and what effect has it had on you? So if you're older like I am, you first saw pornography in print, and that was disturbing enough. But if you are someone who grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, and internet pornography was already easily accessible, then it could have impacted you in much more egregious ways earlier on. So are you somebody that has been a digital native who started looking at pornography at 8 years old and struggle with sex and sexuality in your 20s because you've looked at too much pornography, really to no fault of your own at some point? And what do you have to do to reverse that trend? Because that is a whole different situation. That's a case where somebody probably really does need a good therapist that can help them stop looking at pornography altogether for a good, 4 to 6 months to let your brain heal more than anything. And is porn sexually liberating, or is it a form of sexual repression or oppression for you? Not for everybody, but for you. How does it sit for you? Where does it fit for you? And then how do you communicate that with a partner? And if you're somebody who's completely objectionable to pornography, then don't get involved with somebody who enjoys it or watches it occasionally. It would be like if somebody didn't drink at all and they didn't want alcohol around them, you should get in relationship with somebody who doesn't drink at all, who doesn't even want an occasional drink, who doesn't like it. That will solve your problems much faster, unless you are capable of living in the gray area. And they live in the gray area also, that they are not, prone to addiction with alcohol or pornography or what have you. And what has porn taught you about sex? Has it taught you good things, problematic things? Are there things you wish you'd never seen or known about? Because that can feel a little bit traumatizing also. Hopefully, if you're secure enough, it can just feel like, that was icky and gross, and I'm just going to look the other way and act like that didn't happen. Um, and how do you currently feel about it? How do you currently feel? Because looking at pornography in your 20s can be fun and exciting, but as you get older or as you get into different kind of relationships, it might feel like, yeah, I don't really want it in my life now. I don't feel good about it. Doesn't really do anything for me. I feel like I'm exploiting those people, or I'm a feminist and I don't want to see any woman compromised, or I have religious beliefs, or you name it. So it's really about what is true for you, what you do with your partner, what is consensual between the two of you, and honoring each other and yourself. If you think you might have a problem with pornography, can you scale back or quit for a while to get a handle on things? And if you cannot quit, then you probably need professional help. And that's important to admit to yourself. And the amount of time spent on pornography can be a problem for some and not for others. Porn can be additive, fun, or it can be problematic. So everyone is different, as I've been saying. So what is true for you? And be really honest with yourself about it. A lot of young women, and there's a lot of data that shows this, a lot of women in their teens and early 20s are engaging in a lot of sexual acts that they don't necessarily like, but they know that guys like them because guys watch it in porn. And that is a terrible way to have sex, to accommodate somebody else so they'll love you or want you. If you can't say no and that person can't honor that, then you don't want to be with them, especially when it comes to choking during sex. There was a big article in the New York Times this past year about how choking during sex is the equivalent of having traumatic brain injury. And a lot of college females were struggling with feeling lightheaded, not well for 24, 48 hours after they had engaged in such behavior. So it's creating brain damage. So if you don't really believe in that, you don't want to do it, it's detrimental to your health, don't do it, and find somebody else who's interested in having sex the way that is more aligned with what you want. So is your sexual act of choice, or if your sexual act of choice is masturbating to your electronics, keep in mind that you're building a primary attachment to your devices, not to another person. In any case, remember that sex is a simple act that can be embellished and expanded. It can be limited only by your imagination. So when you ejaculate or orgasm, you are releasing a hormone called oxytocin, which probably everybody has heard about, which in part creates attachment. So whether it's attachment to that person or attachment to your laptop, you're building an attachment there. So you want to be very careful about what you're doing and how much of it that you're doing. Somebody writes, speaking of addiction, feeling good after partnered sex is easy for me, but I wonder about my elevated hormones and my need after a certain period of time to elevate them again by having partnered sex. Is this addiction? That doesn't sound like it. And if my partner's not available when I want them to be available, then I wonder if I'm better off not having partnered sex until I find a partner who's available with the frequency my body seems to desire, which is every 5 to 7 days. Well, I think if you have an expectation about what that partner does for you, if you want them to Yeah, this is really a complicated question, because before I say what I was going to say, I would suggest that, masturbation and self-pleasure is a perfectly fine way to have sex, to have solo sex. It's just when it becomes compulsive, when you have messes in your life, when you start to avoid other responsibilities to get into the sexual act, when you have expectations of the people that you're partnering with, or you start to fall in love with them, even though they're not in love with you, and you just want more and more and more, that's when it starts to move into the addictive realm. So I would suggest that look at the criteria for sex and love addiction. You can go to slaa.org and they have the 40 questions there. But if you're just really, scratching a physiological itch because every 5 to 7 days you feel horny and you want to have sex again, that's not necessarily addictive. And as I said, there are other ways without having to go find another person or another new person, which can get problematic, to bring yourself to orgasm. So spend some time developing healthy sexual habits based in reality, not informed by porn, not informed by other people, but asking yourself what's really true to me. And pay attention also to porn that's made by women versus porn that's made by men. Um, so some porn is made by men for men, and other is made by women for women. And look at the distinction between the two and ask yourself which of the two you prefer. And how does the porn you watch show up in your sex life, in your arousal template? Are you replicating that? Are you just acting it? Are you doing it because you think that's what men want or what women want, or because you really like it? And are you talking about it with your partner to see if they like it too, or if you're just replicating something you saw that you think they would like? Because just because porn depicts certain sexual acts as desirable does not mean that your partner is going to like it. So check it out with them first, before you try it. So this is what I'm proposing is not a plan for looking suave and debonair, like you've got it all together and you're a fabulous lover. It's about saying, I don't know. I'm interested in sex and sexuality. I'm reading. I'm doing a workbook. I watch certain kinds of pornography. I want to try things out, but I also want to know what you like. I don't want to just be this performance artist that is not connecting with you at all, because I like this thing. You might not like it. So get real, be a real person with your partner. Check it out with them before you try things. And make sure all of the sexual behaviors you engage in are consensual, whether you're in a committed relationship or not. Do not underestimate the importance and the power of consent and being explicit about what that is exactly, so that there's no confusion and nobody is being harmed when you're having sex with someone else. As somebody wrote earlier, you want this to be safe. You want to be with a trusted other. You want to be able to unzip emotionally. It's very easy to get naked, but it's hard to get emotionally naked, to be clumsy, to have these conversations about consent and what you don't like and what you like, because we're all afraid of being rejected. We're all afraid of looking dorky and not good and not sexy. But for your own well-being, take care of your own heart. Take care of what you want and need, and worry less about what other people think of you. All right. Well, thank you for your excellent questions today. I hope you enjoy this section of the workbook and that you do some really deep writing this week or this month about these topics and see where they take you. And in the meantime, I also hope you have a wonderful October, and I look forward to seeing you next month.